Hello, so welcome to part 15 of Toxin Sequestration Theory. This is my new theory of cancer. I'm very excited about it. It's very different from the mainstream view. We're arguing that cancer tumors are the body's defense against toxic overload. The body builds them on purpose to sequester, store, and process toxins. And we've gone through a very long list of toxins that cancer does this for. We've talked about the sugars, glucose and fructose. We talked about hormones like estrogen. We talked about industrial chemicals like forever chemicals, microplastics. We've also talked about ammonia, and we've also talked about iron and ethanol, cigarette smoke, as well as several other toxins. So in every case, the cancer is actively pulling it in and either storing it or detoxifying it. It looks very much like what the liver does. And so I view cancer tumors as kind of like a backup liver. The body builds a tumor when it needs more help with detoxification, say if the liver is failing, for example. And, in this series, we've talked about the toxin to organ mapping, how different toxins map to different organs. We've talked about how seed oils map to the prostate. We've talked about how estrogen and oxalates map to breast cancer. We've talked about how obviously the inhaled toxins map to lung cancer. And so there's basically different toxins map on to different types of cancers. And it's very exciting because it allows us to talk to someone who may have a specific type of cancer and say, well, chances are you have this type of toxicity. So, we've also talked about how when you lower your toxic load, you have the opportunity to witness spontaneous tumor regression, where when you reduce your toxic load, say by changing your diet or reducing your environmental exposure, your tumor might be decommissioned by your body because your body no longer needs it. And this is, of course, the natural way to encourage tumor regression, as opposed to like attacking the tumor, which is the mainstream approach. Attacking the tumor carries the risk that when you do kill cancer cells, you actually spill the toxins out into the body fluids, and basically you undo all the body's hard work that it did. That's not what we're trying to do, because toxins cause every chronic disease, whether it's autism or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or heart disease or kidney disease. Every chronic disease is linked to toxicity, and cancer is actually the body's defense against chronic disease. So in this video, I want to just extend to a few more toxins. The theme of this video will be toxic metals. So I want to talk about some toxic metals. I've already talked a little bit about iron, but I'm going to talk about copper and nickel, which are very similar to iron in terms of how they generate oxidative stress. In fact, all three metals, iron, copper, and nickel, catalyze a reaction that's called the Fenton reaction. It's a technical name, but basically what it does is that reaction converts hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2, to the hydroxyl radical, which is OH with a free electron. And the hydroxyl radical is basically the most dangerous chemical in the body. There is no other chemical in the body that's more dangerous than the hydroxyl radical. It is the worst offender for chronic disease. Every single chronic disease is linked to the hydroxyl radical. And it's such a simple molecule, just two atoms, an O and an H. And the reason is that it has this electron, this free radical, that wants to just seek out another electron. And so it's always looking to react with things, and it just ends up reacting with every single thing in your body: proteins, lipids, DNA, mitochondria, everything. And so that's what they call oxidative stress. When you produce a free radical, like the hydroxyl radical, you get oxidative stress, which is basically all your biomolecules get oxidized. Anyway, all three of those metals, iron, copper, and nickel, catalyze the Fenton reaction. They make it happen very quickly. So if you do have, hydrogen peroxide in your body, which, by the way, everyone has hydrogen peroxide in your thyroid because it's naturally produced there, then all three of those metals will catalyze that reaction. And just in the case of the thyroid, by the way, that will cause hypothyroid. Like that will literally damage your. So all three of those metals that I just mentioned will damage your thyroid and that will be a key contributor to Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So iron, copper, nickel, they can all cause Hashimoto's thyroiditis because they convert the hydrogen peroxide in your thyroid to the most dangerous reactive oxygen species. Of course, that's not the only problem they'll cause. I want to just review, by the way, what we've talked about for iron. I talked about it in a previous video, but it has one of the strongest links to cancer. And the other theme of my video will be that the carnivore diet is looking pretty darn good right now because all three of the metals that I'm mentioning are low on the carnivore diet. And of course, you might say, oh, but I thought red meat is full of iron. Well, that's heme iron. Heme iron is not just like iron metal, right? Heme iron is the non-toxic form. But free iron, which is the metal iron, is the form that's found in plant foods. That's what's found in beans, legumes, spinach, and soy, and all of these plant-based foods. So there's like a night and day difference between the iron that's found in animal foods and the iron that's found in plant-based foods. So the carnivore diet happens to be the lowest in non-heme iron. It's also the lowest in copper if you are eating a muscle meat-based version of the carnivore diet, and we'll get into that. And then finally, it's also the lowest in nickel. So you have simultaneously the carnivore diet eliminating three metal toxins at once: non-heme iron, copper, and nickel. So that can explain, obviously there's other things that carnivore eliminates as well. Of course, oxalates and other plant toxins and glucose and fructose and everything. But I think it's underappreciated. Most carnivores do not appreciate that they are eliminating toxic metals whenever they're eating meat and not eating plant-based foods. Most carnivores don't realize that, but congrats. Those of you who are eating carnivore, you are eating a low metal toxin diet. Like I said, I've already talked about how iron gets stored and sequestered by cancer cells. And it really, what's fascinating about it is cancer cells are not using this iron for any purpose. They're literally balling it up into balls of like 4,000 iron atoms and just packaging them up, and you have these balls of iron just floating around inside cancer cells. So today I want to just move on to copper and nickel. Now, copper, I'll start with copper. It is very controversial because there has been a push in social media to try to get people to eat more copper. I've tried very hard to push back against that. In fact, it's well known that zinc and copper kind of compete. They sort of are like yin and yang. And the big deficiency that people have is actually a zinc deficiency. That's what, the majority of the world's population has. They have a zinc deficiency. They have too much copper and too little zinc. So if you want to take a supplement, you should be taking a zinc supplement. And I personally, by the way, do take a zinc supplement. And I actively avoid copper. I'm on a low copper regimen. And by the way, it's not just about copper in the diet. It's also about, some people use copper cookware. Some people use copper water bottles or drink out of copper cups. The water pipes that are in our homes, in America at least, are made of copper. And so that means that the water out of your tap has copper in it. So you have to have like a water filter in order to filter out the copper. Of course, that's true for your drinking faucet, but the shower water as well. So when you shower, you're getting copper on the skin, that can absorb through your skin. And it's pretty much impossible, by the way, to find a really good copper water filter for your shower. I've looked, it's really hard. There's no great brand that really filters it all out. And that raises the question of you could try showering less often. And in fact, I'll just admit that I do shower less often because I don't enjoy getting a dose of copper when I go in the shower. And it's perfectly fine, by the way, to not shower every day. But there's other sources of copper. There's, as I said, there's the plant-based foods. So the foods that are high in copper are nuts, seeds, legumes, chocolate, whole grains. And on the flip side, they're not only high in copper, they're also high in things that bind to zinc. The phytates, the phytic acid, which is in the grains, is a zinc chelator. And zinc is your shield against copper overload, right? Zinc is what you need to prevent copper overload. So it's a double whammy with the plant foods. You get extra copper and you get a zinc deficiency, which means that your shield is lowered against copper overload. If that wasn't bad enough, copper, of course, is in supplements, multivitamins. It's in birth control, IUDs, and also there's this very strong correlation for women with estrogen and copper. So copper is considered a metalloestrogen. I borrowed that phrase from a guy named Dr. Robert Selig. He refers to copper as a metalloestrogen, which means that it sort of bidirectionally correlates with estrogen. So whenever copper goes up, estrogen goes up, and whenever estrogen goes up, copper goes up. So they go up together. And this is, well documented, say, with women's menstrual cycles. There's a certain time in the month whenever estrogen goes up, and then copper also goes up during the menstrual cycle. And that can lead to things like irritability. Guess what's linked to irritability? Well, copper is linked to irritability. And so there's also the fact that xenoestrogens, and this is true for men and women, of course, xenoestrogens, we're all exposed to plastics and BPA and phthalates. These xenoestrogens act like estrogen in the sense that they also drive up copper retention in the body. So they can also make you have copper overload there. So just be aware that, whenever you have too much estrogen in your body, and that can also be from obesity. So for people who have obesity, they tend to have higher estrogen levels. That can drive up copper retention in your body. So there's many different ways to get copper overload. It's easy to get and it's hard to get rid of. And I can say that from personal experience because I am currently going through a copper detox where I'm trying to get the copper out of my body. If in case people want recommendations, I recommend Dr. Garrett Smith's Love Your Liver program. He has a program that helps you detoxify a lot of toxic metals like copper and nickel, which I'll get to later, as well as other toxins. And so he has a clear protocol and that he uses to help detoxify these toxic metals. Okay, so like I said, we've covered the ways that you can get copper overload. We've covered the fact that copper is a toxin because it catalyzes the Fenton reaction, which produces hydroxyl radicals. Now, how does cancer actually sort of store or act as a copper vault? Well, by the way, your primary means of storing copper is the liver. And this brings up an interesting point, which is that many people point to animal liver as a good source of copper. Beef liver, for example, or other animal liver. Well, there's a reason for that. The liver tends to store things that act as toxins. And, of course, like we need copper in some small amounts for some enzymes in our bodies. So yes, it is true that copper plays a physiological role, but in today's modern world, where we have xenoestrogens and BPA floating around everywhere, and we have copper water pipes and people using copper water bottles, the real issue is that we are far above what we need for our biological function, and livers have to store the copper, and that's why beef liver, for example, is full of copper, because the cows as well have excess copper. So when a cow has excess copper, it shoves it into its liver. And then when you eat beef liver, then you're getting some of the copper that the cow was trying to store away for safekeeping as a toxin. And so that's just something to be aware of, which is that I'm very wary of organ meats because some organ meats, like liver or kidneys, can store excess, toxic metals, for example. All right, so the liver is the primary way that the body stores copper. But when your liver is overwhelmed, which is what happens in many cases, where people have been burdening their livers with, ethanol and fructose and seed oils, then your body can rely on tumor tissue or recruit tumor tissue to store the extra copper, cancer cells will, dramatically upregulate their copper transporters on their cell surfaces. This is very well documented. It's in the medical literature over and over and over again. Cancer cells express copper transporters on their cell surface way more than normal cells. So they are pulling in tons and tons of copper relative to normal tissue. So there's something about copper that cancer loves, and once the cancer pulls in the copper, it safely stores it with a protein that's called metallothionein. Metallothionein is a well-known protein that basically is used to capture heavy metals, including copper in this case. So that's basically it. So basically, cancer rapidly pulls in copper out of the body fluids and then stores it for safekeeping with metallothionein. And then we can talk about the toxin organ mapping for copper. The two cancers that are most strongly linked to copper overload are breast cancer and prostate cancer. And the breast cancer case is pretty obvious because I've already linked breast cancer to estrogen overload. So if you have estrogen overload in your breast tissue, then estrogen, remember, correlates with higher copper. So you're also going to probably have copper overload in your breast tissue as well. So that's why breast cancer is also correlated with copper. So similarly with the prostate, prostate cancer cells also upregulate their copper transporters, and you tend to get copper accumulation in your prostate as well. All right, so I just wanted to also just briefly mention that cancer is meant to be a defense against tissue damage, and if you don't, so what happens if you have copper overload and your body's not good at defending against it? Well, the two big things that are common in copper overload situations are neurodegenerative diseases or brain disorders, mental disorders, and the other one is fertility disorders, infertility. So basically, copper attacks the brain tissue and the reproductive tissue as well. It's in the case of reproductive organs, it's linked to endometriosis, PCOS, reduced fertility, higher miscarriage risk, and in men, lower sperm motility and sperm count. So that's really bad. Like, copper has a direct link to infertility in both women and men. Of course, that's why it's used in birth control and IUDs. And it also, like I said, has a strong impact on the brain. It has very close connections to anxiety, depression, ADHD, bipolar, mood instability, and brain fog. I will say that during a copper detox, I tend to get irritability, frustration, and mood instability. So that's and anxiety as well. So it's very closely connected, and I've seen it firsthand with brain issues. All right, so naturally, the good news is that there is a very clear way to avoid copper overload, and that's largely through diet. Like I said, you can go on a low copper diet. The muscle meat based carnivore diet is the lowest copper diet that you can have. There's nothing lower than basically muscle meat, eating things like beef muscle or pork muscle. Once again, so that's kind of the easiest way to deal with copper overload. Obviously, there's other sources as well. I've already talked about these. Think about copper in your water, copper, due to xenoestrogens and everything. But all right, let's move on to the next toxin, which is nickel. And with nickel, I've already talked about how nickel acts as a toxin by catalyzing the Fenton reaction, producing these hydroxyl radicals. Nickel is kind of an underappreciated toxic metal. It's found in stainless steel, which is actually in like everything. I mean, like, what doesn't have stainless steel in it? Like, all of our cookware has stainless steel, and some fraction of the metal is actually made of nickel there. But it's also, once again, heavily found in the diet. The foods highest in nickel are things like, chocolate, nuts and seeds, whole grains and oats, and legumes. So all the plant-based foods are really high in nickel. That's very interesting. And the foods lowest in nickel are things like beef, lamb, eggs, animal fat. So once again, the strategy becomes if you eat a meat-based carnivore-style diet, then you will be cutting out the highest nickel foods. Um, but it's not just the foods, it's also found in orthodontics and dental crowns, especially in pediatric dentistry. This is something to watch out for, especially if you have kids, that dentists will like to put on stainless steel dental crowns onto children. That has nickel, and it has been shown that that nickel can leach into the saliva. Same is true, by the way, for the orthodontics. So if you have a child considering getting braces, just be aware that the braces can leach nickel into the saliva. And that's like a constant, continuous stream of nickel that's always getting into your saliva every single second of the day. Obviously, not very good. But it doesn't stop there. So other sources of nickel are jewelry, watches, and belt buckles, as well as cigarette smoke. It's in cigarette smoke. But apparently one of the biggest ones these days is vaping and e-cigarettes. So the many vaping coils and heating elements are made from nickel alloys. And when they heat up, they release a lot of nickel nanoparticles directly into the aerosol. And people just breathe this directly in, and it's highly bioavailable, goes straight into the lungs. And so for people who vape, vaping is basically their number one source of nickel in their life. So obviously that suggests ways to avoid nickel by cutting vaping out. But cigarette smoke as well also has nickel in it because nickel is naturally occurring in tobacco, actually. So in the tobacco plant itself, nickel is naturally occurring. But many people have connected nickel to like cheap jewelry, and sure enough, there's a famous nickel allergy. Nickel allergy is where if you get nickel on your skin, say due to cheap jewelry, then you'll get these little bumps or rashes, this little red rash on your skin. And there's a really interesting interpretation of that, which is that we can kind of view it as like in the context of toxin sequestration theory, that the skin rash is the body trying to wall off the toxic nickel from getting into the rest of the body, getting into the bloodstream, getting into your vital organs. And so it's sort of like site of contact, little mini tumor. I mean, I'm using the word tumor in quotes there, but it's very much analogous to the way cancer tumors work. So I can actually cast a nickel allergy as kind of like a small scale version of a cancer tumor. It's a localized inflammation that walls off the nickel at the site of exposure. So in that sense, nickel allergy is kind of like a precursor to a nickel-driven tumor. It's a way for the body to locally sequester the nickel in the skin. And most people don't think of it like that, but it is a defense mechanism. It's a protective little kind of mini tumor or containment system or vault that helps to protect you from toxic nickel. But then at the more extreme, whenever you have full-blown nickel toxicity, obviously then at that point, you can get a cancer tumor, and there is tons of evidence that tumors act as nickel vaults. There's research showing that there's significantly higher nickel concentrations inside of tumor tissue compared to adjacent normal tissue, multiple times higher nickel concentration in the tumor itself than in normal tissue. And there's all kinds of medical literature showing this. So tumors really are acting as nickel vaults. And they do this, of course, like in every case, by upregulating the transport of nickel across the cell membrane. So there are specific transporters that cancer cells will upregulate, something called divalent metal transporter 1 and other transporters. Cancer cells upregulate these transporters, and this actively pulls in the nickel into their cell bodies. And then once the nickel is inside the cell, the cancer cell stores them inside of the lipid droplets. That's their safe intracellular storage compartment for the nickel, and then they just store them for safekeeping there. And and then we can also, by the way, talk about the toxin to organ mapping for nickel. As you can imagine, one of the main sources for nickel overload is through inhaled toxins. So people who are smoking or vaping. And so one of the most common cancers connected to nickel overload is lung cancer and nasal cancer as well. Nasal cancer and lung cancer, both of which obviously you inhale toxins through. And yeah, so those are the two most common cancers linked to nickel overload. Um, so what are the practical ways that you can reduce your nickel burden? Well, number one, obviously, stop vaping, don't smoke. Um, be mindful of jewelry that you wear. Choose your cookware wisely. Any stainless steel cookware is going to leach a little bit of nickel out, and it gets worse if you cook with acidic foods. So if you cook with lemon juice or vinegar or tomato sauce, then you're going to leach even more nickel out of stainless steel cookware. So obviously, try not to cook with acidity at all. And you can also think about trying to switch to some other type of cookware. Obviously it's hard to get away from stainless steel, but just think about your options there. And also consider your zinc status, because nickel, like copper, it also competes with zinc. So if you can maintain adequate zinc levels, say from red meat, then it helps to limit nickel's ability to displace zinc as well. All right, so that basically sums up things. We talked about toxic metals, talked a little bit about iron, copper, and nickel. Thanks very much for listening. Have a good day.